I hadn't really planned on doing one of these, but here we are. Welcome to another Simpsons chat show. My name's Cian McGrath, and this is a little project I've been working on for the past few months during lockdown. This project's gone through a variety of changes and more than one false start, but I'm absolutely delighted to be finally bringing it to your ears. Some of you may know me from sports journalism, student media, just around UCC, or you may just cross paths online, but thank you from the bottom of my heart for checking us out. On this podcast, I hope to bring on activists, politicians, journalists, and anyone else who'll come on to discuss their life, their career, and a short discussion about their favourite episode from this show we all love so dearly. This week, we have Stevie G, RedFM Dj, and we chatted about his work with the Cork Migrant Centre, direct provision, racism in Ireland, and Season 7, Episode 24, Homerpalooza. Strap in and enjoy. Welcome to the Irish Simpsons chat show. My name's Cian McGrath. Welcome to our first episode. I'm here with Stevie G. Stevie, welcome.
Thanks, Cian. Good to hear from you, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries, Stevie. It's great to have you on. Obviously, this is our first episode, and I'm delighted to have such a big name on, to be honest. So, like I said, thanks a million. Stevie's a DJ with Red FM and amongst other places. But I suppose most of all today, Stevie, I want to have you on to have a quick chat about your work with Cork Migrant Centre, and I suppose some of the issues that have been cropping up.
Sure.
Not even in relation to Cork Migrant Centre, but around that sort of level of activism. So, do you want to maybe give us a quick insight into your work with Cork Migrant Centre?
Yeah, I've been working with the migrant community here for many years. So, I've been around since the 90s. So, basically, there wouldn't have been a massive influx of migrants in Ireland till around the 90s. So, we've traditionally been a country, as we all know historically, who's gone elsewhere. Uh, and masses of us have gone elsewhere, you know what I mean, all around the world. And it finally flipped. The Irish economy finally got good in the 90s, and there was a lot of wars and stuff elsewhere, and most people will know the history of it, but basically lots of people were fleeing some really bad situations, but heavy migration then happened. It's probably big enough numbers from the start of this century, so that would have been the early 2000s. And I would have been, since the music I was playing was from, I consider it called black music, you know what I mean? Even though it's not all by black people, and I'm certainly not black or have any intention to be, but it's from a black, in fact, if you want to really go deep, you could say that practically all, rock music comes from rhythm and blues as well, and they all come from gospel and jazz, and they go way, way back. But anyway, the music I'd be closely associated with would have been hip hop and R&B, so it all comes from that. From a lot of the best music comes from migration anyway, whether it's reggae from Jamaica, and lots of the roots of hip hop come from Jamaicans moving to New York, and melting pots of music. It's the same with stuff like food and art and even football, which is another passion of mine. You know, it's all people mixing and different stuff happening. So I would have always found that kind of a passion of mine was helping integrate, and build bridges through music and just enjoy the melting pot, because I always enjoyed it. It's like if you go abroad, if I go abroad, I want to see a different soccer club, or I want to see different food and different people and different faces and different music, hear different music. So it was exciting for me. Some people obviously looked at it differently, but it was exciting for me when Ireland became the place that I used to go to London or New York or whatever to find that kind of vibe, So it was cool. So but obviously immigrants or migrants or whatever have big challenges. We all know when we go abroad, we might go to an Irish pub or hang out with some Irish people or whatever, but it can be a bit weird, Sometimes you feel a bit like you don't know where to go, or you feel a bit isolated. So you can imagine what it's like moving abroad. So flipping that with the language barrier, and many other cultural things here. For example, we would have been, we weren't basically ready for it. We weren't ready for people coming here because we always used to leave. So Ireland set up this whole direct provision system, which is meant to be a temporary thing, and it's a bit of a mess, to be honest. But before I even knew that, I was just working with people anyway, because there was obviously, if people come from Africa or whatever, they're usually going to go and seek out kind of music from around the world. So if they come to Ireland, they were usually going to end up in my place or whatever, where I was DJing in Henry's or the Savoy or whatever. And as more people moved here from around the world, I suppose lots of my nights would have been building those relationships in Cork and Dublin and elsewhere. And then there was a big wave so a lot of migrants came here in the end of the 90s, start of 2000, and lots of their kids have grown up by now, you know what I mean? Some of them became teenagers in the last 5 years, and some of them are adults. And that second generation, many of them who were actually Irish because they were born here, lots of them grew up with a different mix of cultures. So they were growing up listening to the music from here and listening to music that their parents were into from Africa, and music from the States, then hip hop or UK or whatever. So they've also had lots of different challenges, you know, being a different colour in school, and we all know all the different stuff that goes on. So the Cork Migrant Centre, which is based in Nail Place, were set up about, I don't know, I think they've been going for quite a while, to be honest, but they set up a program about 4 years ago, and they called me in because I've got a bit of experience working with youngsters through workshops and whatever, and they asked me to help steer a program, which initially I wanted to do as a DJ, but straight away I found that it was better trying to make the program more dance orientated, because all the teenagers who were mostly girls, they were all girls at the time, they were really kind of, that's how I got the best reaction from them. None of them were interested in DJ culture or anything, you know. So that's how it begun. And yeah, we've built a load of stuff since, and we've done loads of work with direct provision and tons of stuff, really. So it's cool. Like the person I mainly work with inside there is Naomi from the Cork Migrant Centre, who's been amazing. She's from Kenya herself. She went and studied UCC, and she's really amazing woman. And then I brought in a couple of different teachers. First, this girl from a Canadian girl who was studying in UCC called Kate Wang, and then my friend Andrea Williams, who's a dance teacher, who I wanted to get in all the time because she's a brilliant teacher and one of my best friends. So we wanted to get her to steer the program. So I got her on board. Like, she was working full time, but I got her on board about 2 years ago. So yeah, it's been building nicely.
Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic project, and clearly something that is really, really engaging people in Cork, and something really useful for those people who mightn't have another outlet. And I suppose in recent times, obviously, it goes without saying, there's been huge activism from minority groups about, you know, making their voices heard, I suppose, is the best way of putting it, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a bit of a backlash in Ireland, people saying that we're not a racist country, and I think that's a very easy thing to bat away. But do you think that there is issues in Ireland, or do you think it's
Yeah.
clear that there's issues in Ireland in a way of this sort of racism?
Yeah, like there's issues everywhere. Like if you ask me, 99% of Irish people are welcoming. We understand our history. We've gone abroad. We understand. We actually trade on it. Like, you know what I mean? We trade on Irish music and culture. Being all around the world, Irish pubs is a perfect example. Irish drink, Irish food, Irish footballers. We're all so proud when we see. Do you know what I mean? If it's Shane Long banging one in abroad, or if it's anything, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we are. So when you flip it, like, most of us kind of recognize it, like it's just a logical thing that, like, and now we've also, like, we have to remember too that, like, first of all, lots of the best sports people in Ireland, or even artists, music artists, have been black anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was like when I was growing up, Paul McGrath, Phil Lynott before my time even. There's lots of people. No, athletes, whether we've Sean Og here as well. Loads of music artists, just half of the best, practically all the best rappers and R&B singers would say. Lots of them are black at the moment. But look, it's not only black and white either. I do think most people recognise that everything is cool, but I do think that first of all, there's that little bit of fear which happened, the whole "they're taking our jobs" thing, and there's a lot of misinformation. People kind of had this impression that there was people getting handouts and blah blah blah, and the government basically set up this direct provision thing to kind of put all that out of sight. So they set up all these centres around the country, which are in rural places which are hard to access, where people can't travel, they can't drive, they can't do anything, and they've put it out of sight. But obviously there has been a bit of tension. I do think a lot of it is stoked up from far right people abroad. Like if you look at Twitter, which would be one of my fields of that I work at all the time, if you could call it work. There's it's all faceless accounts. Lots of them throwing an Irish flag in there, or some terribly Google translated Irish name, or some all this vague crap about republicanism. But basically, to cut a long story short, I think most of us are cool, but we all have work to do on it. I mean, obviously, we all say thankfully we're not like the States, but lots of it here is more subtle racism, systematic institutional racism like direct provision. And there is stuff that, like, I mean, I work with teenagers, I work with people of all ages, of all different backgrounds, and I'm hearing a lot, particularly this week, because I'm actually helping organise a webinar with Nano Nickel Place in Cork Migrant Centre at the moment. And I'm talking, where we actually have a call now in a while. I'm talking to the people, like lots of people are talking up, you know what I mean? See, there's other things too that, like, lots of the victims of this don't want to talk up. They don't want to stir it up in school. They don't want to. They don't want to be kicked out of the country. They don't want to be falsely accused. They don't want to. And some people don't even know. Like, if you talk to a lot of victims of this, that they don't even know that they've been racially discriminated against half the time, especially when they're younger. It's like abuse victims sometimes, sexual abuse or whatever. So there's lots to do, but I mean, luckily, you know what I mean? Sorry, luckily, you know what I mean? We're not like, there's a lot of places worse or whatever, but I don't think we should applaud ourselves for not being racist or whatever. And white people shouldn't be like, I see a lot of that even this week online, you know, like, oh, look at this guy, he's not racist. Like, he shouldn't be getting a medal for that, or she shouldn't. But I do think we've a lot of work, and the way I do it is true. I mean, I train my youngster soccer team or whatever. We're kind of multiracial, obviously, like every football team or sports team, but mainly through music and what I do at Cork Migrant Centre. But even in the broader scale of things, when I DJ in a club or when I do other stuff, and it's not just me, obviously, it's everyone. Like, most people recognise that, like, it is kind of one love, you know, and we're all the same.
Yeah, like I'd 100% be on board in that. Like, and you
Yeah,
know, it's a problem that I think it's not a grassroots problem in that it can be solved by everyone themselves, but it's certainly something that, you know, people should be conscious of. Do you think
yeah.
there's anything in particular that just an average listener here could do to work on to try and be a bit more sensitive around these sort of things?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I've been thinking about that a lot. It's just trying to, even to reach it, like, I know there's people trying to say, oh, reach out, talk to your friends and all that, like, but like, I do think we have to pull it up, you know. If it's if it was like when I was growing up, it was a different climate, like there wasn't WhatsApp or whatever, but like, I do remember casual stuff at matches, like I remember as a kid down in Flower Lodge here down the road from where I'm living now, which is now Parky Ring. There was a black guy playing for Sligo Rovers, and he was being openly racially abused. They were playing in a big match here, and no one had ever probably seen a black guy, you know what I mean, in Cork. Like, the only people back then, when I was a kid in the late 80s or whatever, the only black people in Cork were generally there was a couple of basketball players at Burgerland or whatever, and there were probably guys that no one would mess with because they're about 8 foot tall. But basically, this guy was getting literally openly, like, stuff that you wouldn't see now. You know, if that happened
Yeah.
down at Cork City FC now, he would get pulled up. But even as that progressed, you know, in the 90s or whatever, and like, people are more aware of it now. You know, in sports or whatever, people will. But I do think pull people up on it. Even privately chat to people. I've privately chatted to a lot of young people myself. And obviously, like, you know what I mean, like it's a natural thing for a different community to go to a different country and to stick to themselves because of language barrier and other things. But just try to just, you know, like, make friends or try to smile at people or whatever. And some people won't react. Do you know what I mean? We're not like Irish people generally say hi to each other. Like, if you say hi to someone on the tube, sometimes they give you a stare as if you're going to mug them. So it's not just the easiest thing to do. But like, I do think just to be aware of it, definitely not fuel any of that online stuff, because a lot of it is coming from people. Like, it is in the interest of some horrible people on the far right or whatever to create this tension. And you could see that happening with some of the false stuff that's been spread during the week. About there was some very obvious stuff being spread on WhatsApp groups about gangs in Dublin that, like, if you actually did any investigation, you'll realise, like, all the names been used in the so-called Black Gang were the first 5 or 6 names if you Google common African names. And even the talk, like, it's pretty obvious, but not everyone is au fait with the internet, so people do believe what they read, you know. But I would just say, just be aware of it and just to do your bit, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's a basic human thing for me. None of us are born racist, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there earlier that you're doing some work on a webinar with the Migrant Centre.
Yeah.
Is there anything coming up in the next few weeks or months that people can kind of get behind and support if they want to get involved in what?
Yeah, I'll definitely be promoting that anyway on social media because I think it's public now.
Mhm.
We're trying to get the young, mainly black, but young people of different races to be the speakers. We want it to be aimed at the young, like there are lots more outspoken people as they get older or whatever. And I've been
Mhm.
pretty happy with, like, especially the Irish music community has been very outspoken in the last couple of weeks. Even like they even managed to get Versatile to apologise, that rap
Mhm.
group from Dublin, over some of the stuff they said in the past. And this time last year they were being asked to apologise and they just ignored it. Like, no, they, like, I'm not into shaming people all the time, but like
Mhm.
I'm actually glad that they've actually apologised finally, even though I think it's a bit weak. But I do think what we've got a webinar. We're hoping to do dance classes down in there. We can't really do much with the whole situation now, but we're hoping to do some socially distanced ones in some of the provision centres because, again, I would urge people. There's some good podcasts and there's some good reading under the whole direct provision thing, but I would
Mhm.
encourage people to investigate that a bit more, like, and just to be aware of it, that this is like a permanent state of lockdown that people are in. Like, it's
Mhm.
not like, I'm not going to say it's exactly like prison, but like I've been down there in some of the places, and the contracts are private and there's no real kind of like some of the people who run them aren't really kind of they don't have to put on good facilities. And I just think that there's a lot of people living in not great conditions, and it's a kind of a situation that, like, Ireland are spending money on it anyway, giving it to private companies. But I do think we can deal with it better. There's some people living here for 9 years, people born here who aren't considered Irish citizens, which is ridiculous when you consider that other people who are born in England or whatever can get citizenship quite easily. So I just think we have to look at all that, just be aware of it all, and just build bridges. Like, you know what I mean? People are even looking at the whole Black Lives Matter thing as being like a confrontational and all that, and like people are angry like for a reason. You know what I mean? And things change because of this. If we didn't, like, if people didn't march in the '60s or whatever, we wouldn't have made progress on loads of stuff. Like, and Ireland as a country now has had to fight for its civil rights as well.
Mhm.
Women have had to fight to vote. We've had to fight in recent referendums for stuff which we take for granted now, like marriage referendum and all stuff like that. But like this all takes a bit of time, and like I just think we should just be aware of things and to look up on it, and maybe not just always look at the alarming things and feel under threat, because a lot of this comes from fear.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant, Stevie. And so that's all our questions on the Migrant Centre.
Yeah.
After the break, we'll come back and we'll have a chat about the episode of The Simpsons that Stevie selected, and he chose season 7, episode 24, Homerpalooza.
Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, oh, Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas.
So welcome back. Short break. Not quite got any sponsors yet, but so that we take a break, give Stevie a bit of a break for this. So like I said beforehand, you chose Homerpalooza. I think season 7, episode 24. Do you want to give us a small insight into why you chose that episode?
Yeah, like, I wouldn't be like the biggest Simpsons fan in the world, but obviously, like everyone, I would have grown up with it. And I was just thinking about Homer Palooza because I remembered it. I remember obviously Cypress Hill being on it, and I was at the Lollapalooza festival in the States around the time when this was based on. It was based on the whole Lollapalooza festival, which was created by a guy called Perry Farrell, who's a singer with Jane's Addiction, who are a great band, and Porno for Pyros too. So they would have been a group that I would have really liked as a teenager. And he set up this festival with this aim of being like not just music, it was also arts or whatever. But it was quite and it fits in with the spirit of this time too. It was quite righteous about about political beliefs, getting people to vote and blah blah blah. And I was at the festival around the same time in the '90s, and it was across different kind of musics. So in this episode, they've the Smashing Pumpkins, who were at the one I was at. They nearly broke up on stage. They were always fighting with each other. There was a Tribe Called Quest and the Beastie Boys, who were at the one I was at, but the hip hop band in this one was Cypress Hill, and also Sonic Youth, who were a big band that I would have been into growing up. Um, and the one I was at as well was amazing. Like the Verve were there on a tiny stage,
Mm-hmm.
like playing to no one. No one knew them at the time. There was a band called I think the Breeders were there, but Luscious Jackson, who were kind of like a girl group mixing hip hop and rock. They were on the Beastie Boys label. I met them actually, the side of the stage. But my favorite group, Tribe Called Quest, were there. The Beastie Boys themselves were there, who I was a big fan of, and George Clinton, who was a hip hop pioneer, who Snoop Dogg sampled a lot. So even then, he was probably about 50 or 60, and his band P Funk All Stars, I think it was Parliament Funkadelic, who were a huge group in the 70s. All these people at the gig were looking at them, gonna go, "Who are these old men?" And they came out with they were all dressed up. One of the guys used to wear a nappy on stage, and they all had massive water pistols, and all these young girls dancing with them. But then they played their music, and everyone knew the music because Snoop Dogg sampled them and all that. But it was just mad. This was my first real music festival, you know. Like I'd been at Fela and stuff here maybe, but like this was what the Electric Picnic and all these places ended up being, but it was 5 years in advance. So it was a massive memory for me. Now, the Homerpalooza thing also has associations because I'm a dad, and he was just like feeling left out. Now, I'm quite hip to music, so it's not the same for me. But he's kind of going like, oh, all these, and there's lots of references to some old movies and cultural things. But it was quite like Homer was suddenly trying to be cool with his kids again, and his kids were like, no way. But I find out, because even though the music I listen to is really cool, my kids, who are probably listening to this next door, like the last thing for a kid to admit is that your dad is listening to good music. So I could associate a lot with that. But the storyline on it was just typical. Like it was a bit wacky, but it was really good. But there was some great observations at the festival. And this whole, like, this is an alternative festival, but I remember going to the festival that I was at, and it was practically all white kids. The music was very multicultural, but all white kids. And at the time, the fashion was to dye hair green. I think MCA, one of the lads in the Beastie Boys, had his hair dyed green, and so it was all these like alternative people, but like they all had their hair practically the same. And it reminded me of when I was like growing up. One of the bands I liked, who I saw many times live, were The Cure, and Robert Smith and The Cure had a famous haircut known as the Cure head, and he also had a song called "Jump in Someone Else's Train," which is about like not conforming, but like all these Cure heads ended up having his haircut, and I would have been deeply into punk before hip hop, so. But I never had a Mohican or anything, because to me, like, punk is about the music, its individuality, and people tried to make it, like, even though music and fashion always go hand in hand, if you're really being, like, sometimes the most, like, the biggest nerd in my class was the most punkiest dude, you know what I mean? But, like, if you looked at what he wore. So, for me, this said a lot, like, you know what I mean, about youth culture, you know, that, like, you know, you, like, sometimes people just look at it, what people wear, and like, and they kind of associate that with, like, but lots of the real rebellion takes place outside of that, like. But music and fashion is something that's always fascinated me as well. I can imagine what I was actually wearing back then at that gig. I can't remember, but no, the episode was good. Like, there was lots of sharp observations about it, and it was just your typical Simpsons, like, just enjoyable, a roller coaster, and the music stuff was amazing, like Cypress Hill. They were backstage and someone ordered, and it's typical of festivals these days. You know, everyone's so arty. It's like there was a symphony orchestra, and I was like, who ordered the symphony orchestra? And Cypress Hill were like, oh, we might have, but we were stoned or whatever. But all that kind of stuff, you know, because like it is quite funny at music festivals now that they're not just about like a band playing on stage. They're about all sorts of arts and activism, and it is quite easy to parody it as well, you know.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I've looked it up there just while you were chatting there, and this episode did come up before I was born, which is weird. I haven't been able to find an episode of The Simpsons that is like, I'd say this is one of those really top quality ones that is just so easy to watch. You don't notice the time going away.
Yeah.
But it's just, well, the references went straight over my head in some cases anyway. I could definitely feel, you know, like you're saying, the Homer trying to show his kids. I think he's carpooling other kids, trying to show off the music, and they're mortified. It's incredibly relatable as someone who's I'm 21 now, so I can kind of almost see it from both perspectives. I've got younger siblings, and if their friends were over and I was trying to play music, and it was great. And I think the best bit for me in the episode was when it goes to a flashback of Homer when he was suppose, like you were saying there, looking back at his time going to festivals.
Dazed
And
and Confused was actually, ironically, I saw that movie that it's referencing, Dazed and Confused,
Oh yeah.
which is an amazing movie. So basically, I actually only saw that movie. There's this site called Mubi. It's a bit like Netflix, but it's for more art house stuff. And there's this amazing movie which is actually shot at around the same time as that Simpsons episode. So I'm just googling it here. It says 1993, so it would have been just before that episode. So this movie would have been a throwback to the 70s. Now, if you watch this movie and because even me, who's watched the movie even recently, I still think the movie was shot in the 70s, but it's actually one of those throwbacks. So what happens in a lot of generations is there's always a movie throwback to like 20 years previously. So in the 80s, there was all these 60s movies. In the 90s, there was 70s. And it always kind of happens. But this movie was brilliant. And if you look at the cast, it's all these people like Ben Affleck, Matthew McConaughey, all these people who became all huge actors in the end. But it's an amazing movie, and it's brilliant about that whole whatever, how do you say it? Youth culture, counterculture, and lots of comfort. Like the people who didn't fit in as well were being kind of like bullied, and there was all that kind of stuff. But that's what the reference. There's a little bit of a reference to that in the episode. But anytime Homer is brought back though to his childhood, it's always
it's always top quality. When Grandpa Simpson said that I used to be it, then they changed what it was, and now it's weird and scary to me. I think that kind of sums it up pretty well, better than you possibly could.
It sums up a lot of things. And the music was dead on too. Like, I mean, I got all the music references, but like this guy Peter Frampton and the vocoder and people high as a kite in the crowd, kind of wondering, is this good or is this whatever? But it's quite interesting. I enjoyed it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not one episode that kind of stuck out for me. I'm not sure why, but it was one that when I rewatched it, I remembered bits. I remembered the bit where Homer's getting the cannonballs, and there was just little bits that stick out in your mind. And I think that's the same for a lot of Irish people. Do you feel like that? That it's kind of something that was just there? A lot of people seem to find it very relatable in Ireland, especially. I wonder why.
Yeah, it was like, to be honest, this actually got me thinking, geez, I wouldn't mind go watching more, because it's just something it's always been there. I remember the times when it was whatever time it was on, like tea time or whatever, just watching them, and like, again, never been a super fan or whatever, but like always been kind of like, especially back in the day, obviously, but like the cultural references and everything was sharp. You know what I mean? I mean, I always laughed. I always kind of enjoyed it. And they usually got the music sort of side of things right, which would be one of the things that I would have been like obviously keeping an eye on. But yeah, no, it's like, it is something we take a lot of great stuff for granted. But from being an artist myself who does create music or whatever other stuff, sometimes I'm always just looking at it going like, how do, like, the amount of episodes and the amount of, like, because when I was looking at it, was like season this, I was looking for a different episode earlier, and it was like season 28, and I was like, the actual volume is just absolutely, because like creating stuff is hard enough, like, but like I remember they did that, like, there's people talking about Friends and all this stuff, which was how many seasons, but like the Simpsons is like how many years, like, you know what I mean? But it's the volume, and trying to keep that at that level for a long time creatively is interesting,
Yeah, I was just looking at some trivia about the actual episode itself now, and they actually originally had Bob Dylan lined up for the Peter Frampton role, but he pulled out at the last second. And there was a few others. There was a few bands who refused to be in the episode if other bands were in it and stuff.
Yeah, they said Sonic Youth didn't want Courtney Love. Now, the famous thing there would have been, obviously, Courtney Love was with Kurt Cobain or whatever, and Sonic Youth would have actually been one of the groups who helped Nirvana blow up, because they played with them in Cork, but they also helped them get them signed to Geffen label, which is a major label. And obviously there was some tension between Sonic Youth and Courtney Love, who riled up a lot of people. I always kind of liked her as an artist or whatever, but like, there's always been this kind of like thing about Courtney Love. She's quite a controversial figure, but she was a good actor. But I don't know what the ins and outs of it. I was actually looking through that earlier myself. I was keeping an eye on it. But they had some really good some good bands in it or whatever. And obviously, not everything worked out. Like, I mean, Bob Dylan would have been a good one because he's obviously a lot better known than Peter Frampton.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting.
I think the one reference that I think makes the episode more dated than anything else is the reference when he says it to the guy who's working in the music shop, and he mentions Apple computers, and the kid goes, "Oh, what's Apple computers?"
I know,
think
it's
that was
amazing.
that was the one thing that caught me out. That I was thinking, oh, that's
Yeah.
a bit out of date.
Because it's amazing when you think of the Apple, like how Apple came in and Apple came out of, and it was gone again. Because I remember growing up, there was a guy who lived next door to us, and he was American, and he called us in one day. We knew he was working with like Apple computers, with like about 20 people working there, and he called us in. He showed us his old computer, and we were like fascinated. But like, when you think of what that has actually become, or when you think of what happened when, like, even after Apple were big, and they were nothing, and how the company went. But yeah, that was a mad reference. But walking into like, this is something that anyone gets when they get older, you know, and they're kind of going like, what are these people, like, what are people listening to, or what are people doing on TikTok or whatever, and then you know you're old, you know.
Yeah, I've started to get that. I think TikTok, I was saying it to my father actually, it was the first one that I went, I don't get this. You know what I mean? This is just what's the story of this now? It's the first social media app that I haven't even tried to go near, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, wait for another 10 years and you'll definitely feel
it. And I suppose, just before I finish up, I mean, generally, something I'm going to ask everyone is, who's your favourite character in The Simpsons and why?
Well, I just thought of Homer straight away, so I mean, he's a bit obvious, isn't he?
I mean, you're the first episode. You can take it if you want. Like,
yeah, like, but obviously I like Bart as well. Like, you know, he's cheeky. He did a rap, do the Bart man, so I gotta respect that. But yeah, I never really thought about it, but I guess we gotta pick Homer. Like, you know, make it harder for everyone else.
You'll get in early with that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks a million to Stevie for coming on. Obviously, look, keep up the brilliant work at Cork Migrant Centre, and for anyone who's listened who wants to get involved, I'm sure if they reach out to you, Stevie, you'll probably point them in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's brilliant. Actually, one of the things about the last couple of weeks with this whole turbulence of the world is there has been loads of people kind of getting more, and just I should wrap up with that. Like, you know, getting more like, I wouldn't call myself an activist, but getting a bit more kind of like involved, because like I grew up in a situation, I've mentioned this before, that like I remember for a few years not even voting because I never felt that it was going to make a difference or whatever. Yeah. And then like I've also lived in a time where we've had great presidents. You know, they don't have the most power here, but we've had Mary Robinson, Mary McAleese, Michael D. Higgins. But we've also like made a bit of social change when it comes to like marriage referendum, even repeal, all this stuff. So I do think people can, and I think the last election, or I know that's all up in the air, but like the young people getting activated is making a difference. There's no point in moaning if you don't like I've no allegiance with political parties, whatever, but I do like what's right and wrong. But I do think, you know, getting out there and trying to like stand for something and basically speaking up and not just leaving everything happen. I do think, but the young people definitely have the power, and you can see even if it's marching in the streets or whatever, you know, like people power actually does make a little bit of a difference, and it can change things, you know.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to end it, I think. Absolutely fantastic note. So thanks a million for coming on again, Stevie, and we'll be sure to have you on again further down the line.
Thanks, Cian. See you later, man.
That's brilliant. Episode 1 down. Thanks a million to Stevie G for coming on. I'm hoping to make this a weekly podcast, so head over and follow us on Twitter @SimpsonsShowIE. That's @SimpsonsShowIE. And you can follow me @Cian McGrath on Twitter. We'll be announcing our next guest very shortly, so keep your eyes peeled. Check out Stevie on Twitter @Stevie Grainger, and Cork Migrant Centre are available @Cork Migrant. This show is in no way affiliated to Ireland Simpsons fans.